Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership, the show for business executives and global corporations who appreciate a principled biblical lens on leadership, featuring the song Consuming Fire by gospel jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan. You are listening to our Resource Renewal Series featuring shows for times such as these. Today, I want to talk about how you respond when someone brings a monkey to drop off on your desk. Some years ago, there were a lot of articles written about these monkeys that travel around in organizations and that people try to get rid of, get them off of their plate and put them on your plate. And so, what I want to talk about today is what are your response options when it looks like somebody's about to drop a monkey off on your desk? As an executive leader, people are going to come to you with many requests, and you have to decide in advance some of the ways that you can respond. First of all, I would suggest that you pause, you take a breath, you listen, and then you decide whose plate should this task be on? Should it be on your plate or the person who's coming to you, or perhaps on the plate of someone else? So let me go over 5 potential response types, or rather 6 potential response types that you can use in the workplace. The first one is to listen. You're listening only, and you're listening for information. Someone has had an experience and they want to give you information about their experience. There's no action for you to take. All you're doing is receiving the information and saying thank you. That's relatively easy if, in fact, you stop at listening and don't go to any other steps. The other question you might ask yourself, though, is, am I really the one who should be listening to this, or perhaps should someone else be listening? So do identify if other people should be listening and not you. Number 2 is to provide information. So perhaps the person comes to you, they have to make a decision, they have to do something, and they're just missing information that you have. Perhaps it's a decision that was made in the executive team meeting. They weren't present that day, or maybe they're not at the executive level and the information hasn't trickled down to them yet about what was decided. So when you're providing information, you provide what's needed and then it's done. You're out the door. That task still does not come to your plate, it remains where it is. And then number 3 would be what I'd call being in an advisory or a consultation role. So the person has a challenge. They're not really sure how they're going to walk through the challenge or what the answer is, how to fix it. So, in your role with a bit more experience, a bit more knowledge, and perhaps a broader context about the organization, you can ask many open-ended questions. Open-ended questions starting with how and starting with what. You might ask them, what have you done already? How did that work out? What else are you considering? What constraints might be in place if you take route A as opposed to route B? And as you're asking them questions and as they're reflecting and thinking, because you're going to ask questions sometimes that they haven't thought of, or that also deepens their own perspective on solving their own issue. So the advisory role, the consultation role is critical. It's important because you are helping your people to develop deeper expertise and to learn on the job every day. The number 4 would be to recommend resources. So when the person comes to you and they have a challenge, they may need to know where to go, what people to consult, what tools are available, what books, manuals exist in the organization to find the information that they're looking for. So again, you're not solving it. You're not going to those people. You're not going to the manual. However, you know where the information is, and now you're just letting them know where the information is. So you're recommending resources. And then number 5 would be to provide resources from the point of view of being a top cover. So, number five is when you are top cover for someone, you're not going to exactly take this issue onto your plate. However, there's a part of it that you can fix, a part that you can solve, because maybe there's a person who is more senior to them in the organization with whom you have a relationship or who you can go to really remove barriers. So you may have that conversation, then you come back to this person and say, had the conversation, the doors are now open, and you put it back on their plate. Actually, it should never have left their plate. You just removed, if you will, a lot of debris from the train tracks so that they can keep running the train down the track. So that's being top cover. That's a limited fix, limited solving from the position of top cover. And then number six is you take the issue from the other person and now you move it to your plate and it becomes your issue. Very rarely should the issue really go to your plate. So you really want to think about whether it should move to your plate or not. Most of the time, it does not need to move to your plate. Yes, you know how to solve it, you know how to do it, but that doesn't mean that it is your responsibility. So I would say that about 85 to 90% of the time, you want to respond in a way that you're either listening to information, providing information, operating in the advisory consultation role, which is very valuable to your people, and fourthly, recommending resources. Maybe about 8 to 10% of the time, you might be in the top cover mode where you really do have to intervene and be top cover for your personnel. And then maybe 1 to 2% of the time, max, and maybe less than that, you take something on and move it to your plate. That should be a rare occurrence. So I would say don't take the monkey unless it really belongs to you. People in your organization need to learn what you already know, and they learn by doing it themselves. Don't shortcut the learning in your organization by doing the work. The learning organization is most agile, flexible, versatile to meet customer needs. And that means practicing internally what you ultimately want your people to do with the external facing clients or customers. You want to build capacity in others to also do what you do. That's the intention. So, as we think about this today and thinking about how people may try to move some monkeys around, you have at least six response alternatives, and five of those keep the monkey on their plate, and that's where you should be most of the time. So, I'd like to conclude today by reading Acts, the sixth chapter. And this is when, in the early church, in the early days, they had to find deacons to do the practical, everyday service, operational work of the church. And by analogy, that's what you're doing. Your people are there to do that tactical, everyday operational work. So now, in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint against the Hebrews by the Hellenists because their widows were neglected in the daily distribution. Then the 12 summoned the multitude of the disciples and said, it is not desirable that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. Therefore, brethren, seek out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But we will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So, by analogy, as an executive, you're giving yourself continually towards the strategic actions and the vision of the organization. Now, if we drop down to verse 7 in this biblical text, it says, then the word of God spread, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. So, when you build capacity in your organization, the work gets done actually at a more profound level than if you did it yourself, because you are raising up people who are competent and capable, including those who can operate in those 6 boxes of response that I just mentioned. Others can listen, others can advise, and you're helping to identify that. So have a blessed day being in the strategic chair. So today begins a look at our 7 step client success or empowerment process. And so, step 1 is what we're going to talk about today, which is envision possibilities. And I want to mention all 7 to you just briefly so you know what they are and you know what's coming up. So, number 2 is leverage gifts and strengths. 3 is shift mindset. 4 is inspire success. 5 is neutralize obstacles and barriers. 6 is create safe space. And 7 is take responsibility. Now, the reason why we use this 7 step process is we want to come alongside our clients to help them create more viable options in their business. And we also want to maximize what I'll call the energy, the positive can do mindset to actually achieve an opportunity. We're also helping clients to overcome obstacles and to get unstuck. So, in this first step, envision possibilities, what we're really doing is helping clients to get a greater vision for themselves and their organization, for them to spot some opportunities that they might not have noticed before. So, for example, I'm often speaking with clients, and because of the competitive marketplace the way it is, they may have to think very creatively about partnering with people who in the past they might have seen as competitors. And maybe they wouldn't have thought of those competitors as partners. Or maybe they're partnering with suppliers or people who are recommenders or other professionals out there who are also serving their ideal client but with a different service. And we're helping them to look at what is the win-win in coming together with these other people. This happens a lot also in the federal government work that we do, where you might take a look at the prime contractor who's got the big, huge contract, and yet that person needs to bring in subcontractors who have the subject matter expertise and the ability to deliver certain components of the contract. But the prime is taking care of all of the logistical details and all of the contracting on the back end, which often a small business may not even have an opportunity to have the resources to do. So this partnering can happen out there with other entities, as we're mentioning in these examples, or sometimes we're also helping organizations to partner with their own team members to begin to address the complexities that they're facing so that they can co-create that successful future. So imagine you might be in a market area where your organization is facing fierce competition, a lot of competitors out there, and one smart person going to their desk and trying to figure it out is probably not going to come up with the best approach. And so you want to be bringing together lots of smart people in your organization, thought leaders, to think about those complex environments and what are you leaving on the table or not even seeing because it's around the corner, but collectively you'll probably be able to uncover it. That's what envisioning possibilities is all about. So some questions I have for you would be along this line. How do you get out of your own way? How do you get out of the box? How do you work with others to get to those new opportunities? So how satisfied are you that you're really taking advantage of the multiple opportunities out there in your business and around your business, and that would really position you for greater competitive advantage? Now, some of you, in answering some of these questions that I've been asking, you might assess yourself as doing very well, and you see yourselves at the top of the game. Wonderful. Others of you might say, well, we see a few little places where we could actually be even more effective. No matter how you see yourself, what are the processes that you have in place on a regular basis to ensure that you continue to leverage those opportunities, that you continue to mine them and discover them in your business, as opposed to have it be more haphazard and maybe more on autopilot? One of the main reasons that my clients engage work with me is because this is what they get out of the process. They actually get new thinking and new thoughts about opportunities they never saw, and opportunities that actually take them to another level that they wouldn't have realized as quickly, and some things maybe not at all. So I'll leave it to you to think about whether or not you want to have that next conversation about the opportunities in your organization. As you know, we are now working on the 7-step client success and empowerment process. And today we're on step 2, which is leverage gifts and strengths. And last time we actually talked about number 1, which was envision possibilities. So in this step about leveraging gifts and strengths, my clients actually end up calling out and using their talents, gifts, and strengths and abilities that frequently were previously unappreciated both by them and also those around them. So let me give you an example. One day, I was working with a senior leader and the senior leader's executive team, and we were doing a team development session. And this particular senior leader decided to include his executive assistant. And that's not always done. However, it was a smart move on this leader's part. And we were doing a particular communication exercise. And as it turned out, the executive assistant was the person on the senior team who was the most skilled at hearing others and using multiple senses to discover and amplify options that no one was seeing or that no one thought about. The fascinating part was she didn't know she had that ability. Her boss didn't know she had that ability, and the team was pleasantly surprised. So going forward, they were actually able to leverage those gifts and talents in the assistant that previously remained hidden. And that's really what I'm talking about, is being able to look at something that maybe you've only used a certain way and to see what else is there. So for example, in my book, Lead Yourself First, I have a section in there where I talk about what I call blizzard food. It was a time where here in Colorado, we had 4 feet of snow. That's a lot of snow. And I had been preparing for a major party and had cleared out all the food out of the refrigerator, out of the cabinets, expecting the caterer to come the next morning with all of these wonderful goodies. And I had overnight guests at my house as well. So we wake up, 4 feet of snow, no real food in the house, and I have house guests. So it was incumbent upon me to look in the pantry and see what I previously couldn't see. And for that weekend, I had to create what I ultimately called blizzard food, which means there really was food in there, but it took some creativity to find it and see it. And it really could be leveraged into some new dishes and some new ways of combining materials to keep us all fed until we were able to get out and get additional food. So this is what I'm talking about. In your organization, there are also hidden talents, gifts, and strengths within people. And so I want to challenge you to think about it this way. Number 1, look for the gifts that you haven't seen in team members. And you might say, well, how do I do that? Well, number 2, one way you can start is ask them what they love to do and what they're good at, even if they're not at work. Because sometimes people are leveraging gifts and talents outside of work that you never see at work. And so thirdly, you might also ask them, what are the gifts and strengths that they believe they're using in some other place, maybe a volunteer organization, and yet they're less deployed at work. And these are things they'd like to do more of in the work context. You know, you hear me talk a lot of times about the win-win kind of a solution. And one of the reasons that we want to leverage gifts and strengths Obviously, it's going to benefit the company if you have people using their signature gifts and strengths at work, and especially if it's something that they really like to do or want to do. Now, the other win is that it's also great for them. They get to grow, they get to stretch their wings, and they get to make a greater contribution. And sometimes we don't think about that part, that people are wired to create and to grow and to be acknowledged for their gifts and for their strengths. So you're not only benefiting the company and the organization, the business, you're also benefiting that individual person in your organization because they are discovering how they can best contribute. And so it's incumbent upon you as a senior leader to help them to discover that. That's a must if you really want to be a great leader. So you've heard me so far in this session talking about my book, Lead Yourself First, the Senior Leader's Guide to Engaging Your People for Greater Performance and Impact. And you've heard me mention the Blizzard food story, which is one of my favorites because I remember looking into the pantry and thinking nothing was in there. Don't let that be your story in your organization to open the pantry and see nothing when there's so much good food still in there. So I invite you, if you have not yet gotten your copy of my book, Lead Yourself First, please go to Amazon and get a copy of the book. And if you've already gotten a copy, then I invite you to write a review on Amazon. All right, see you next time. Today we are on step 3 of the 7-step client success and empowerment process. And step 3 is called Shift Your Mindset. I have a question for you. What impact does mindset have on the level of success that you achieve? What impact does mindset have on the level of success that you achieve? Let me give you an example. I was once speaking with a woman who was in a job that she, for many years, had loved and had planned to retire from that particular job. And at the moment that I met her, she was going through some significant challenges with a new boss. And she thought the only option she had was just to retire, and to retire earlier than she had intended to retire. Well, we sat down and we talked about that for a while, and we looked at this issue from multiple different directions. And she left the conversation having seen some other ways that she could go. And it required a shift in mindset about what she could do at work, a shift in mindset about choices that she had, opportunities, directions, and she, on the other hand, had sort of pigeonholed herself into one path that led to retirement. And so by challenging the mindset, we actually identified other possibilities. In another case, I remember speaking with a client who really wanted to be heard in the organization and wanted to be heard to gain credibility. And this client's perspective was that the way to gain that credibility was to advocate strongly for a position and to take a strong stance on a particular position. And the more we talked about it, it became clear that the more productive strategy might be to listen deeply and advocate less. And that required a shift in mindset. So, what I find is that clients often gain new perspectives and new ways of viewing their current circumstances and opportunities. And as a result, they move from the position of being stuck or saying that I can't to a position of saying I can. And it's a much more uplifting place to be. There's always more than one way to view an issue. So just imagine that you are sitting around the table and there's an object in the middle of the table, and there are multiple people around the table. Depending on which side of the object you're looking at, you're going to see different aspects. And the more we can share those different perspectives or turn the prism in the light, so to speak, we will actually uncover more options, more choices. And as we see more, our mind expands and opens up to more creativity and greater possibility. Let me share a secret with you. And the secret is this: when clients come to me at the beginning, and often they don't know this, the reason they're stuck is frequently because there's something in the mindset that keeps them on the one path which is not working very well for them. And so, what happens as we work together is more options open up, the mind expands, and is able to consider other routes and other choices. So, what clients tell me is this: they say they start off at the beginning of the meeting and they've got a big, huge agenda of items, and they're wondering where to go next and what to do. And they're excited about coming to the meeting because they know that by the time they leave, the mindset will have shifted and they will have created a new pathway forward. And what's exciting about that is they're going to do it faster and it's going to be a productive path that works. So if you would like to also experience that stimulating mindset shift that actually puts you on your best success path, then let's talk. Today, we are looking at step 4, Inspire Success. And this is on our 7-step client success and empowerment process journey. And if you've been with me for the entire journey so far, you know that we've already been talking about envision possibilities, leverage gifts and strengths, and shift mindset. And here's what I've observed: my clients who really step into the sandbox on the first 3, envisioning possibilities and leveraging gifts and strengths and shifting mindset, they actually come to this place of inspire success where they experience what I will call a remarkable transformation. Now, this transformation is actually a freeing up of their emotional energy. So I call that an emotional epiphany. So if you're kind of stuck in mindset, let's say, or maybe you don't fully know all of your gifts or all of your strengths, and you don't see the possibilities, you may not feel as much of the hope or the passion or the confidence as would be useful to fuel the vision forward. So, what I discover is that in Inspire Success phase, I am actually helping my clients to increase their energy, increase their enthusiasm, so they actually can move forward in a powerful way. And not only for themselves, they can also even deal with the flagging morale that could be happening in their own organizations and with other people. Because imagine, for example, a leader might come and this leader's in charge of, let's say, a manufacturing company. And the manufacturing company gets stuck in their old mindsets, old leadership style. Maybe they're losing people, really good people. Morale is low and they keep doing more of the same thing harder and stronger rather than figuring out the new thing to do. When we get to this place of inspire success, and now the gas is back in the tank, and they've identified some new pathways forward, they now have the momentum to actually get different emotional results and different business results. That's very powerful. And that's what most of my clients want. And that's what they're looking for and can be difficult to achieve when you're just thinking from the same ballpark that you're usually coming from. What if you actually woke up inspired and filled with hope and passion for what you can create at work today? And what if those feelings were actually contagious and spread from you to the rest of your organization? What else would then be possible with that much fuel going through the system? Many times when I first meet an executive early on in the journey, what they think is that they need more techniques or more baseball bats, maybe to hit their people over the heads with, in order to move forward. That's what they're thinking at the beginning. What they don't understand often is that connection between the emotions, motivation, and next step action. That's what they don't always get, is that somehow the emotion is tied to what you're going to be able to do. So the question I want to leave you with is this: do you and your team actually reach that level of emotional epiphany that I've been talking about that actually fuels your ideal success forward? Perhaps that's something you can probe inside your organization and discover, do you have the gas it takes to get there? Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated. Did you know that workplaces can make a significant difference in the lives of people, and that you can create a positive culture that gets positive business results and also produces positive life experiences for your employees and your clients and customers? You can make a significant contribution to the world by creating the kind of culture where your people can bring their gifts to provide the most relevant and excellent products and services to your marketplace. What the research shows is that companies with excellent leadership are also more profitable. So as you flourish and as you grow in the world, you can do more for yourself as well as for others. So if this is resonating with you and you want to create a positive, profitable, and powerful corporate culture, and you care about succession, leaving the organization in a better position than when you found it, do keep in mind that that kind of legacy is something that's intentional. And I am happy to partner with you to take your organization to the next level and create that positive leadership culture. So reach me at Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Sometimes I work with high potential clients. These are the ones who've been designated and identified in an organization for higher level responsibilities. Well, I went with one such client. He actually was working in a business that was global, and he was responsible for a unit that was very profitable and that was doing very well. However, as his company was actually trying to centralize a lot of activities, they wanted to standardize some procedures which would have really obliterated his area of the business because of the nature of the work that they did. And they were actually considering phasing them out, even though the company was looking to become more profitable. And so, what my high potential client had to do was to figure out a creative way to remove this barrier on the part of the senior leaders who imagined that the only way forward was really to standardize them, to bring them down to the lowest common denominator, and ultimately to get rid of them. And so he ended up creating a business case for why his unit should be retained, and with some different privileges than what was maybe necessary with the other business units in the organization. In the end, he was very successful actually presenting that case to the senior leaders and getting the change implemented. Although at the beginning of our work together, he thought his only choice and option was to leave the job and go to another company and perhaps help his team members to figure out how to land safely elsewhere also. Today's episode, Step 5 on the 7-step client success and empowerment process journey, is actually neutralize obstacles and barriers. And it's one of the things that all leaders have to do because there are always obstacles and barriers in the roadway. Rarely do we have smooth sailing, or if we do, it's not for long. A storm is going to brew up somewhere. And that makes me think of another client who is actually the head of a company and was having some challenge helping the board chair understand a new direction in which he felt they needed to go. And having exhausted some of his, if you will, street credits with the board chair going direct, we actually had to identify other influence points through other people around the board chair who had information and who had perspectives that would be helpful in moving the organization in the direction it needed to go in. And that ended up being a lot more profitable than continuing to hit the same spot over and over again and not get anywhere. And so often when we're faced with obstacles and barriers, that's what we do. We continue to do the same thing and then get the same results. So if you really want to neutralize obstacles and barriers in your organization, sometimes it takes some focused effort to force yourself to think very differently about the obstacle. So I have some homework for you today. Part 1 of the homework is this. I want you to think about an obstacle or a barrier that you see right now at work. And this is the hard part. I want you to sit down and quickly brainstorm at least 20 ways to do one of a few things. Ways to go around the obstacle, ways to go over the obstacle, ways to scale it, ways to get rid of it. That's just brainstorming. We're not saying whether they're good ideas or not. Brainstorming. Number 2, I want you to go to at least 5 people. They don't have to be in your workplace, but 5 people you know, and ask them to give you 1 or 2 good ideas about dealing with that obstacle and see what you come away with. So you may be wondering, why did I give you this particular homework? The reason why I recommended this homework is that one of the challenges when faced with obstacles and barriers is that people often think they have to solve them on their own. And that's usually the least effective strategy. When you're faced with obstacles and barriers, and the more daunting they are, the more you need some outside voices. You start with your voice, hence your own brainstorm list. Then you reach out to others around you in your close-in circle. You get some other ideas, and you can reach out even farther than that. You can also reach out to partners outside the organization as well. So I would say, don't hesitate. I'm also here for you, and I'd love to help you neutralize your obstacles and also your barriers. So feel free to be in touch. One of my clients was leading a team in Asia, and one of the challenges he had was he was having a hard time getting them to take risks or to offer their ideas on what to do next. In fact, no matter how many times he tried to empower them, how many times he tried to ask for their input, they just sort of capitulated to him being the boss, and they sat back and waited for him to give instruction. So what we did, he and I sat down and we crafted some ways that he could interact with his team members that were different from the ways that he was already interacting with them to create what I call experiments. These are experiments in the workplace where you try some things out, you do some things differently. And in his case, it was both what he did to bring the group together in a more informal and a social way, so they got to know one another at a deep level, and also how he brought them together in the work context around the work. And so as we created these experiments, which created some safe space for his team members in a parallel way, he and I created safe space together so he could bring whatever issues were going on, whatever he was experiencing, he would bring that in and we would discuss that. Now, what's the next step? And then we would talk about, okay, here's how to take it to the next level, or here's what you do next. So I think that one of the real benefits of step number 6, create safe space, and the 7-step client success and empowerment process is that my clients have a place where they get a chance to talk about the raw, the raggedy, the ugly, things that are working, things that are not working. They have a chance to stretch and to grow, to practice. Because sometimes in those sessions, we actually practice conversations that they're going to have out there when they get back with their true people they're leading at work. And because we're practicing it in the session, when they go live in real life, they're actually doing it better than they would have done. And they're also figuring out what are the resistances they're going to run into. Because, of course, I'm going to play all different kinds of roles, including, the naysayers and the tough customer. And they're going to leave out of there better prepared for all of that. One of the things that I've observed in my years of experience is that senior leaders often have the most difficult time finding a safe place where they can experiment, where they can practice, where they can make mistakes, where they can say whatever they want to say, and where they can show up maybe not totally polished. Whereas inside the organization, if you show up a little bit raggedy, sometimes it has very, very long-lasting and potentially negative consequences. So it's been my experience that senior leaders really benefit from having a trusted advisor, somebody who they know is for them, who has their back, who's for the success and the best interest of their organization, their company, and who sees them not just as a person at work, but as a whole person, a whole leader, bringing their whole self to work. In other words, no topic is really off limits. It really doesn't have to be lonely at the top. You can have a trusted advisor who helps create safe space for you so you can show up at your best. Are you the sort of leader who is often pointing the finger and blaming other people for the problems that you're experiencing? Are you the sort of leader who often is casting yourself in that victim chair? And before you go away or send me hate mail or turn this off and say, I'm not that person, I'm going to invite you to stick with me in today's segment, which is step 7 of our 7-step client success and empowerment process. And step 7 is take responsibility. Here's what I've noticed. I've noticed that a lot of leaders, even leaders in significant roles and positions with lots of authority, often fail to see just what they can do, as I say, from their chair. And from their chair, no matter how highly placed it is, they're often looking above them somewhere else and thinking about they ought to do X over there. So if you find yourself pointing that finger and saying they ought to do, or I'm stuck and I can't do because they, then this segment is for you. And we're going to be talking about identifying what you can do from your chair. Now, I often run into this, especially when I'm working with my federal government clients. And in that space, as some of you may know, it can be very difficult and sometimes almost seemingly impossible to fire people who are ineffective or even to replace people who are problem people. And here's the thing, if you fill your mind with what you can't do, the lane in front of you becomes very narrow. And traversing that lane is rocky and difficult and depressing. So often I'll see people in that space. They're feeling depressed, they're feeling oppressed, and they're feeling as though they're on a rocky road. And frequently, the stories that they're telling themselves in their heads about what they can't do are not even completely true. So now we get all the way back to something that we covered in an earlier segment, which was really about shifting mindset. And that was step number 3, because mindset really runs throughout all of these steps. And at every step, we have to look at where mindset leads us. So the work that we do is to say and to help people identify, where do they have power and agency? Because in fact, all leaders do. All leaders have power and agency. And when you get plugged into that power and agency, then it's just like electricity to a light bulb. You're going to shine brightly and be able to illuminate what it is that you want to do next. One of my greatest joys and pleasures is actually working with my clients and seeing that electricity illuminate that light bulb and seeing them move sometimes from that blame finger pointing place, that victim space, back to their sense of power and agency. Nothing delights me more and makes me happier, because once they get to that spot, I know they're going to be taking massive steps forward in the right direction and achieving the dynamic organizational results that they actually want to achieve. And that's why I do this work. That's why I'm here, because I want to see that and I want to help clients get to that spot. So if you're still with me and you haven't turned off the show yet, that means that perhaps there's been something here of value for you in this 7th segment of Take Responsibility. And this is the last of the 7 segments. And so if you did not get to hear one of the earlier ones, I want to invite you to go back and listen to the others, which were number 1, envision possibilities. Number 2, leverage gifts and strengths. Number 3, shift mindset. 4, inspire success. 5, neutralize obstacles and barriers. 6, create safe space. And 7, take responsibility. Now, as I'm sure you know, it's really all 7 of these things working together in different patterns and at different times. And it's not like one of those things like, okay, I got my vaccination, I did it once, and that's all I have to do. I never have to get that vaccination again. This is one of those things that's more like brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth multiple times because that's how you take good care of them. So everything in here is connected together to help you see a good future, sometimes a different path, to have your mind aligned, to really propel you forward with the gifts, talents, and strengths that you have, so that you're using that emotional fuel to inspire yourself and your organization, and that you're collectively co-creating ways to neutralize those barriers and those obstacles, and you're creating safe space both in your organization. And if you have me, for example, as a trusted advisor, we will create safe space so that you can think about what you haven't thought about yet. And this all allows you to identify what you can uniquely do from your chair. And if that's who you are, you want to know what you can do from your chair that's going to take your business to the next level, then I look forward to hearing from you. Many times when it looks like people are not taking accountability or responsibility for their actions in the organization, frequently it's not because the individual is flawed. Now, of course, there are individuals who have some challenges and issues and they refuse to take accountability. However, if you are noticing that that tends to be true of all of your people or most of your people, more than likely you have more of a cultural problem rather than an individual problem. So, what we're going to do today is to take a really close look at what happens if people are not taking responsibility and how to actually cascade accountability better in your organization. So frequently, I am actually working in organizations where initially the culture is one that I would say is one of blame or what I'd call a punitive culture. And in a punitive culture, basically, when anything goes wrong, people are looking for who to pin that on, and heads start rolling in the organization. For the team member or the employee, it's kind of a win lose scenario where that team member or employee is the one who is the loser. And so, in this kind of an environment where blame and punishment, a lot of times they're very negative consequences, and punishment for problems or issues that take place, what you end up creating is a culture of silence and a culture of hiding errors and mistakes. And you intensify and magnify that tendency to point fingers. So, in such organizations, you end up having what I call constricted learning of the growth and the development in the organization. And people, because they're hiding out, they're covering up errors, those errors remain a part of the DNA of the organization and they don't get fixed. And the learning that's necessary to move forward does not happen. So, how do you then move from this blame, win lose, punishment, finger pointing culture to a culture of accountability? So, number one, I would say it's important to reward the identification of problems because identifying problems is actually new learning in the organization. So rather than to see a problem as something to be punished, say, whoops, they've uncovered this. Great. Because now that it's uncovered, we can do something about it. We can get rid of it as a problem and we can move forward. So that's number one. Figure out how to reward the identification of problems. Number two, come together collectively to discover a fix. Most problems in organizations are very complex and they're deep and they have a lot of tentacles that stretch throughout the organization. And you're not going to see all aspects of that problem with one set of eyes. So when you bring team members together collectively, you're much more likely to see the fuller extent of the problem and identify what would work to fix it. So I'd say create the fix collectively and together. And number three, when you bring that team together, it's important to ask, what are we doing well? And then also, what can we improve? You need to ask both. And so often, I find that people are willing to ask, what can we improve? But they kind of skip over or avoid asking, what are we doing well? As if that's unimportant. But what you do well is the foundation upon which you're going to build the future. And you want more of what you're doing well. And sometimes what's going well is in one area, and you can transfer those same practices over to another area. So it's very important to identify and explore what's going well in addition to what you can improve. And then number four, what else do we need? Sometimes as you're fixing something, you recognize and realize there's a resource that's missing. There's a support that's missing. And you want the team to be able to identify, well, what do we need in order to really do this at the level that we want to do it? What support do we need from each other? And what support do we even need from outside of ourselves? And then number five, the question to ask is, How can I help as opposed to who is to blame? So, whenever there's a challenge out there and the opportunity really in the problem, the question for each team member is how can I help with that problem? So, by focusing on these 5 approaches where you are rewarding the identification of problems, number one. Number two, you're coming together collectively to identify a fix. 3, you're asking, what are we doing well and what can we improve? And 4, you're saying, what else do we need? What additional support? And number 5, you're asking, how can I help? When you do that, you are moving from the blame, finger pointing, punishment culture to the accountability and learning organization culture. And I find that as organizations create that, more people take responsibility, raise their hand, and say, that happened because I did so and so, or that happened because I failed to do so and so. And here's the story behind it, or here's what happened, and here's what I'm going to do differently in the future, and here's what I need to move forward. And that's a very healthy place to be. In the work that I do with a variety of organizations, the key distinction that I've seen over many years between organizations that thrive versus those that don't is that ability to really cultivate the accountability culture. And for many people, when I first meet them, it's also being able to move from the blame, finger pointing, punishing culture to create the accountability culture. And what I've seen is that when organizations commit to this and put the practices in place that support that new kind of learning and accountability culture, they quickly move to thriving and to really making a difference. So I would love to bring that same culture to your organization and to really help you dial in that learning and accountability culture and, if necessary, extinguish that blaming punishment culture. So give me a call and we'll talk about what that looks like in your context. Thank you for listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. I am also your concierge executive leadership advisor for when you need to make tough business decisions, facilitate executive succession and transition, develop your executive team, lead change, create a positive and profitable culture, or leverage marketplace creative advantage. You can reach me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Also go to my website, transleadership.com, for more leadership resources and insights. I want to give special thanks to Ron McMillan, gospel jazz saxophonist and national Billboard recording artist, also known as Mr. Sirius XM Jazz Watercolors, for allowing us to use his gifted music on our show. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.